Regents review number 23. The first question asks you to find the slope of the line passing through the following 2 points. There are 2 ways to solve this. The first is by using the slope formula, which can be found on your reference sheet. The second is by using your calculator's Stat Edit button to calculate the linear regression between those 2 values. Let's try using the formula first. So in the formula, y2 minus y1, we first have to identify our 2 y values. And depending on how you take notes, this might be your first point, and this might be your second point. That would leave us with negative 3 minus 5 as our y2 minus y1. And our x2 is 5, and our x1 is negative 7. Notice there's a double negative sign here, so be careful when computing. You can compute by hand, or you can type this whole fraction problem into your TI-84 by using the fraction feature here in the alpha y equals menu. So I'm just going to type negative 3 subtract 5 in the numerator and 5 subtraction sign, then a negative sign for the 7. When I compute, I get my fraction in simplest form, negative 2/3. Again, to use the TI-84, without computing using the slope formula, you could have went to the Stat Edit button and typed in your 2 points, which were negative 7, 5, so negative 7 in list 1, and then 5 in list 2, and then the second point was 5, negative 3. Once these 2 points are listed, you can go back to the Stat button, arrow over to the Calc menu, choose number 4 for Lin Reg. Press Enter 5 times, and there's your slope. Unfortunately, this one is in decimal form, but it's the same as negative 2/3. Question number 2 is a properties question, which asks you to indicate how the left side changed from 3 times the quantity x plus 2 into the expression 3x plus 6. The only way to remove parentheses is by distributing, so this must be an example of the distributive property. Question number 3 asks which one of these relationships can be described as causal. Causal means to cause. So if your alarm goes off, does that cause the sun to rise? No. If the car is moving slowly, does that cause the driver to sing? No. If the snow is falling, does that cause the stores to run out of snow shovels? Probably. People probably need to buy shovels. Let's double check the last one. The birds are chirping. Does that cause the rain to come down? No. So that means the answer was 3. The more it snows, the more the stores run out of shovels. Causal. Number 4. A function is defined here, and it represents the height of an object from the ground t seconds after it's dropped. A realistic domain for this function is which one of these options? Now, a domain is your x value. And in this case, our x value, or our input, is the letter t. So that means anything that doesn't have a t in it can't be right. This is technically a y. That's a description of the range. Now let's think about this one here. This function is talking about t seconds. Is it possible that you have all real numbers as your time? Can time be negative? No. So this one is out. So the question is, are we dropping it from negative 3 seconds to positive 3 seconds? Or are we dropping it from 0 to 3? Well, since we've already determined that time cannot be negative, this is our final domain. The formula of the area of a trapezoid is shown here. It asks us to express b sub 1 in terms of a, h, and b sub 2. So in order to do that, I'm going to isolate this variable here. Since that variable is in a quantity, I need to get rid of everything that's outside that quantity. So 1/2 h is multiplying the quantity, so technically the inverse would be dividing both sides by 1/2 h, but we don't divide by fractions. So I'm going to multiply by 2, giving us 2a equals h times the quantity b1 plus b sub 2. Now I'm going to divide both sides by h. And therefore I can remove the parentheses. Now my final move is to subtract b sub 2 from both sides, giving me the final expression that twice the area divided by the height minus base 2 is equal to base 1. Now I can use this formula for part 2 of the question. Part 2 asks, if the area of the trapezoid is 60 square feet and its height is 6, and one base is 12, find the number of feet in the other base. So all I need to do is fill in these numbers. 60 is the area, 6 feet is the height, and one of the base is 12. So if the area is 60, and the height is 6, and one of the bases is 12, that will give me the other base. Pick up your calculator. Let's put this fraction in here. 2 times the quantity of 60. Now, even though I know pretty quickly mentally what this is going to be here, 120 divided by 6, I just like to type in the exact formula so I can double check. So that gives me a base 1 of 8. And this is complete and fully correct. For question number 6, you're asked to graph two functions on the coordinate plane below. So I'm going to use my graphing calculator to help me graph some of these functions here. Looks like f of x is the function negative 2x squared. So I'm going to type that into y1. I'm going to take a look at these points here. Now when you're looking at points, it's important to find enough coordinates that will fit, but don't go off the grid. So it looks like negative 3, negative 18 would not fit. So I'm going to start by jotting down my table here so that it has the value starting with the value of negative 2. So my f of x function will go from inputs of negative 2 all the way to positive 2, because positive 3 would also be off the graph. So negative 8, negative 2, 0, negative 2, negative 8. And I'm going to graph these points. So negative 2, negative 2, negative 1, 0, and you'll notice it's symmetrical, so these points are all going to line up here. I'm going to try and draw this nice curve here, like this, and then I'm going to label my graph. And now I can go get some points for g of x as well. 2x minus 4, this is linear, I can actually graph this by hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Negative 4 is my y-intercept, and then my slope is 2 over 1, 2 over 1, 2 over 1, but I could definitely go and jot down a couple of points from the table if I wanted to by typing 2x minus 4 here in the y2, or erasing it and looking at y1. And I'm going to graph a few more points here. And you'll notice I've got an overlap here and there. So first I'm going to connect my line. I'm going to label my graph g of x. And now I'm going to use this graph to determine all the values of x for which they're equal. Can also see it here in my graphing calculator. So as I'm scrolling down to my inputs, I see negative 2 has the same outputs. And then as I scroll here, I see 1 also has the same outputs. Okay, so that means my x values for which the two functions are equal are negative 1 and positive 1. No, I'm sorry, negative 2. Negative 2 and positive 1. You could put little squiggly braces here if you'd like, but that's what they're asking for. Only the x values. Next question is number 8. Looks like I've misnumbered. But this question asks you to determine what would be an appropriate domain, right? A domain is an input for a function, and if the function is called c of n, where c and n are talking about the number of observed vehicles, right? So n is the number of observed vehicles. That's the input. The input is the number of vehicles. So we have to think about what would make sense as a possible value for the number of vehicles. Could you have -2 vehicles? No. So that means 1 and 2 are out. Can you have half a vehicle? Also no. So that means that number 4, or all of the set of whole numbers, would be appropriate. Question number 9 asks you about the rate of change, right? And we're talking about from 0 to 1, from 1 to 2, from 2 to 3, and from 3 to 4. So we're looking for the steepest section of the graph. So just by looking at with my eyes, it's looking like this one might be the winner, but we're going to double check by doing some math here. So the rate of change from 0 to 1 has a delta y, right, and a delta x. So the change in the y is 2, the change in the x is 1. For the hour of 1 to 2, the change in the y is 1.5, and the change in the x is 1. It looks like for sections 2 to 3, I have a 1 over 1. And for the last section here from 3 to 4, I have half over 1. So indeed, from 0 to 1 has the greatest rate of change. Question number 10 is about some nickels and dimes that have a total of $1.25. So my nickels and dimes have a total of $1.25. Now, looks like they're not using N and D, they're using the letter X. So let's see how that fits into our understanding of so far. Well, right now I know that I have some nickels and I have some dimes, and if I add them all together, it's $1.25. I know that nickels are 5 cents, and I know that dimes are 10 cents. So I'm going to change this to 0.10. Now the problem is I don't have the same number of nickels and dimes. What I do have is 4 more nickels than dimes. I have more nickels than I have dimes. Now if I wanted them to be equal to each other, then I would need to have more dimes. So my nickels would be equal to my dimes if I just had 4 more of them. So technically this is how many I have. So instead of saying N for nickels and D for dimes, the problem wants us to use X for dimes. So that means that the nickels is equal to X plus 4. And the dimes are known as X. So instead of the letter D, I could replace this with an X. And instead of the letter N, I can replace this with an X plus 4. And that is another way of writing our initial equation. And that gives us option number 2.